Hello, and welcome to the Level 4 Diploma in Health and Social Care, Unit 405, which is Managing People in Health and Social Care. And week one, we're actually looking at recruitment. So the objectives for this week's tutorial is 1.1, evaluate the factors that are involved in planning for recruitment, so the focus on the planning. And 1.2, evaluate the recruitment process with links to legislation and policy. So you're going to actually, for your assignment, you're going to write a bit about what the recruitment process is, and then just bring in the relevant types of legislation. The legislation I'm going to be talking about for this tutorial is UK legislation, UK employment legislation. And for you to complete your assignment, you need to use UK employment legislation, okay? Most of it's contained here, but you can also Google it if you want to look at it wider. But for your own interest, if you are from another country, it will be interesting for you to do a bit of research on what legislation is relevant for your own country, okay? But this will just be for your own personal study. As I said, for the actual assignment, you need to use UK legislation, okay, to get the marks. Okay, let's move on then. Let's start thinking about the recruitment process. Recruitment process, which is hiring staff, plays a very important role in company success. The actual quality of your process often sort of affects whether you get good people or not. So the better your process, the better the staff you probably can get, really. If you have a poor process, the high quality staff will sort of steer away from you. However, there are several factors that influence the process, and it's important to understand them. And we're going to look at a few of those now. So, firstly, we're going to job market conditions. The overall economic climate and the conditions for job market can really influence the recruitment process. You might need to make changes. So, during times of economic growth, when the country is doing well, there will be lower unemployment because if there's a lot of jobs, if there's a lot of growth, that means there are more jobs for people to take, so there'll be less unemployment. So people will be fighting for high quality staff, really, especially if the field you're in is quite a large field. So those of you who are working in care, quite a large competitive field. So you different care homes can be competing for different staff. So job seekers have more opportunities, so they've got the ability to pick and choose a little bit more than you have. And it can be quite challenging for you, the employer, as I said, to get the quality staff. Conversely, if we're in a period of economic downturn, when there isn't that much growth, so not a lot of organisations are expanding and developing, then the job market will favour the employers, sorry, because there will be more people looking for work than there will be jobs around. And that means you as an employer get the chance to pick and choose the quality staff because there'll be a lot of people, trying to get your job. So this means that maybe your processes don't always have to be that good because people want the job anyway. But that isn't really a reason not to have a high quality process, really. And that leads me into the next thing, really. A high quality process is very relevant for your reputation. A company's reputation plays, it's a really important role in getting, again, very good quality staff that rather than having choice of the people that nobody else wants. Um, and it also, if you have good quality staff, that affects your reputation as a whole, which means your performance is generally better. Your performance in all areas is often better. So your reputation can only go upwards, really. So getting those good, high quality staff, well, people are more likely to apply for a position in an organization that's really, really well known. It's got a positive work culture, employee satisfaction, and opportunities for growth. So, and it's really important in this case to build a very strong brand, an employer brand that people recognize and respect, and really showcase your positive work environment. Just an example for you, it's a fairly contemporary example. It's now 2025, and there's been quite a lot of issues lately in the British press about Harrods. Now, for many, many years, certainly all the years I've been growing up, Harrods has been considered one of the absolute premium stores in London. And it was, anyone who has any work experience in retail, that would be, if you wanted to work in London in the West End, then getting a job in Harrods would be the creme de la creme, really. That was because the pay was good, the benefits were good, you working in what is absolutely the premium store. You see lots of fabulous people coming in, you're selling fabulous things. So it had a huge reputation, and it was an incredibly sought after job, as I said, especially if you're a skilled retail person, it'd be a place to move. Unfortunately, now the previous owners of Harrods has, although he's died, there's been lots of allegations about sort of sexual abuse and mistreatment that has come up, particularly the way he treated young female staff. And there's been claim after claim after claim, and this is absolutely tearing up Harrods' much coveted reputation as being, a fantastic place to work. Because what people are saying is that the staff were not cared for, they were not looked after. In fact, they were put at risk. Um, there was no duty of care taken for the staff at all. In fact, he made use of the fact that the staff were, and he had other members of staff who were colluding with him to carry out some of these really quite vile behaviours. And although Harrods is with a new owner now, completely new owners, they are still suffering from it. And it is still costing them an awful lot of money because they are going to have to pay for some of the people who've suffered over time. Now, whether or not you think that's fair or not, you know, lots of people have different views about that, but that is what's happening. So this once great department store, his reputation is sort of pretty much still being dragged through the mud. And it's going to be really difficult for them, even though the new owners have got absolutely nothing to do with the guy who ran it before. Totally different people. They're still reeling a little bit from it, and it's probably going to be quite hard for them to recruit for a while all these court cases are going on until it all settles down. Everybody knows that Harris has agreed. Fortunately, they're fairly wealthy to pay compensation to lots. You're talking about people, in hundreds, over 100 here, people that are having to be compensated, and it's quite a long process you've got to go through. So if you work for Harrods, you'll probably think, well, there won't be a lot of growth, there won't be a lot of new development. They might have been spending money, doing up maybe the building or parts of the building, but they probably won't be doing that now until they could deal with all the money they've got to spend on this compensation. So it's gonna hold them back as a functioning organisation. So just bear that in mind, really. And so a lot of people will think, well, I was going to apply to Harrods, but I won't apply for them now. A, I want to see all this thing work itself out, and B, at the moment, it's not a growth company, really. It can't be. It's sort of in stasis till it sorts itself out. So real problem for that. So just bear that in mind. Okay, the next factor is recruitment channels and what sort of recruitment channels you use, really. Um, there's all sorts of channels you can use, job portals, social media. Job portals are uh, online portals such as something called We Have Indeed, and that's pretty much national. You just log on from anywhere in the country and you look for jobs anywhere in the country as well. Very good. Um, Career websites such as LinkedIn, that's international, so some of you might know about that. A lot of people do use that um, to get into contact with people who are specifically doing certain jobs. That's exactly what they're looking for, and that has proved a lot of people now get jobs from there. Social media in general, especially if you're looking at sort of small local jobs, they may be advertised on Facebook groups that are, relate to your area, or on an organisation might have an Instagram channel or something like that, and they might just pop up some jobs there, which really keeps them very focused around the area. So lots of ways to go. Employee referrals. If you're a small company, you might be able to bring someone in who lives locally. You might just use word of mouth. My friend's a nurse. She used to work in a care home. She's working agency at the moment, looking for another job. She might be interested here. Should I, do you want me to give you a contact number? So informal sort of stuff like that, although they would probably still have to go for a recruitment channel. And general recruitment agencies, we have many agencies. They used to be the main way to get jobs through agencies, and they used to have offices in town. Some of them still do. A lot of them tend to be online only now. They don't seem to be as strong as they used to be. The job portals seem to be sort of stronger now, so, because they are so national. So all these different ways of doing things can impact the quality and the quantity. So if you if you're sort of starting a new care home and you want a whole team, you're going to need to sort of spread yourself around, use different ways to make sure different types of people and different types of staff connect with you. So those who use Indeed job portal, to the handyman who might see something on a local social media group. You need to use different things. Recruitment agency, you might get a specialist agency that recruits nurses if you need nurses as team leaders and that. So or you can't just use one way, and it can become expensive. So you also have to work out how much do you want to spend, how many jobs are you recruiting. If you're recruiting for a new team, it's worth paying the money. If you're just recruiting for one person, you need to really think about, what are you doing and can you focus it. You might not use all the different channels, but the important thing is a variety of channels can give you a diverse group of staff. You might get people who don't look for jobs in some of the other channels, only look in one particular channel. So there is a value in spreading yourself around as well. Job descriptions. A good, well crafted job description is really, really important. Have a look at the graphic. Think of the sort of things your job description needs to cover. It needs to outline what the roles and responsibilities are of the job. It needs to give you some of the organizational goals of the company, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to make a big change in the next year or two, people need to know that, really, if they're about to sort of move to a new job. It needs to include your educational qualifications and your professional qualifications if it's necessary. It needs to be very clear on what the skills that are needed as well, and what you expect from the role, what sort of skills you expect, and what sort of skills you might want people to develop. Maybe again, if you're going to move in a different direction, you can say you can come with these skills, but we need you to be prepared. If you don't have this skill, you might need to be prepared to do it and then learn, train in the next year or so. And obviously, it needs to have the salary range and all the usual sort of terms and conditions like annual leave, sick pay, and that, so that people know exactly what they're applying for. The better, the more well crafted the job description, the better you will get more appropriate applicants. So don't make it too vague. But on the other hand, don't bring it down to the absolute, nth degree, because then you'll get people who might just not like one aspect of it and then won't apply. And maybe that's something you could negotiate interview. Okay. So then you need to think about the selection process. You need to have it organized. There is steps. So here I've shown you a little graphic that's got 8 steps into it, and they are pretty much the standard steps. You might not use all 8 of them depending on the job. It needs to be streamlined. You need to have no extra steps in it that don't need to be there. And it needs to be fairly seamless. And the most important is you need to keep in contact with people. So the first thing could be a preliminary interview, which you might do or you might not, depending on the type of job. Some jobs do, some jobs don't. So that's really a very sort of open one. So you might have like an open day, where people might come along and have a look at the place, especially again if you say, imagine it's a new team, you're setting up a new care home. So you might open the place up for people to have a look at. They can come along, show a bit of interest. You can take all their details, and you can have sort of informal chats with yourselves and with staff who maybe already be recruited. It may be part of the development team. Then setting an advert, and then receiving applications. And then there's a process. Needs to be an organised process between those who are going to be interviewing, who will screen the applications. You may do that with some organisations, might do that with their human resource department. Some people, it might be the team managers who do it. It really depends. The next step after that is if there are any preliminary tests that you need to do. It might be to do with literacy. If it's an admin role, you might give them a maths test or an English test or a typing test, for that sort of thing. If it's a nursing role, you might give them a couple of tests as well, just to make sure they know their processes. Then there'll be a standard interview, usually with a panel of people. Same set of questions will be asked to everybody. You may need a medical examination, or it may just be a checklist that you work for. Really depends on the job, whether it's appropriate or not. But you usually have to sign some things to talk about your health and that sort of thing. Then reference checking, which, once you've had the interview, you may get references. The HR department may be getting references for you while you're having the interviews. If your candidate agrees, sometimes people don't like you to collect an interview until they've collect a reference until they've at least had the interview. If they know they're not interested in the job, they obviously often don't want their manager to be asked about a reference. But some will say yes, it's fine. And then once you've got all the references, you will actually look over all the information you've gathered from your tests, your interview, your examinations, make sure everyone meets the requirements, and then decide on who you're going to offer a post to. Okay, and then contact that out. And there will be a very set process for that. It needs to be fair, it needs to be above board, It needs to be beyond criticism, really, not to show any favoritism. It needs to be anti-discriminatory, um, and it really needs to meet all the other types of legislation, which we'll talk about another time. So, salary and benefits, we need to think about that as well. I mean, most job seekers will be looking at the compensation packages. We're not all angels, we don't all work for free. Those of us who are wealthy enough to do that, well, that's lovely. But most people, need to be able to pay their rent or pay for their car or whatever. So they need to know exactly what the compensation package is. Obviously, if your care home has a much more competitive salary and benefits package compared to the care home down the road, stands you in good stead. People will often choose your home over the other one, really. So compensation and benefits, they are actually two different things. When you bring them together, they create the package that people need. Compensation is how much are you going to get paid for how many hours, and is there any additional allowances for unsocial hours or for working on a Sunday, or for working in the night. So all that needs to be sort of very clearly documented. Also, it would be useful to let people know what the increments are. So if you work there for a year, does your money go up? And does it go up? Does it go up every year? Are there incremental salary bands? So people know how much they can earn now, how much they can earn maybe in 5 years' time. On the other side is benefits, which are these benefits are non-monetary awards, so they're everything that isn't compensation, really. And they can be sort of provisions such as health insurance, pension plans, obviously time off, annual leave. That would be, it's classed as a benefit, but really, there is a minimum that's allowed here under employment law. So benefits, it could be a car allowance, it could be a travel allowance. Nowadays, people often get money towards buying a bicycle if they live within cycling. That we have a government scheme that organisations can use to sort of pay money up front for people to buy bicycles. So those sorts of things. Dental plans, very popular in America. We don't do them so much in this country, but we do health insurance. There's a lot of organisations, if you're lucky, that might offer a health insurance package. Okay, your recruitment process needs to think about diversity and inclusion. It needs to promote diversity and inclusion within its process. So it needs to be fair. It needs to be anti-discriminatory in its practices. And this is really important because it can lead to a much more diverse and innovative workforce. So I've got a little few things in the graphic here to think of. The sort of things you might need to think about in diversity and inclusion. So companies that tend to prioritize diversity and inclusion often get a much broader range of candidates in the first place, and they often benefit for people bringing in new ideas and new perspectives, maybe from a group that they we haven't ever thought of. So you can get some lot more a variety of ideas and perspectives. So we've got things to think about, how to be inclusive. People of different ages, people at different life stages, family status. Some people may be mothers, some people may be fathers. They have children to think about. So, can you accommodate those sort of issues? People of different background experience, people who maybe have worked in different industries but have transferable skills rather than just throwing them out because they haven't worked in that exact same situation. People with different disabilities, how can you adapt a place for them to work? What can you do to give them a chance? People of different sexual orientation or members of the LGBTQ plus groups, different offices and locations. Can they work from home? Are there different bases they can work at? Is it a community role or is it based in one care home? What's the transport like? Do they need to be drivers? People's ethnicity and their culture. We need to make sure that we don't put people on the back foot because they have a different culture and they may want to apply for the role. So, you may need to, especially if you live in an area where there's a predominance of maybe a certain immigrant culture, you need to make sure, that you actually reach that cultural group. So it might be, some more creative advertising. It might be things put out in different languages, really. They obviously, if they're going to work in your care home, they need to be able to speak the language that's used in the care home. But sometimes just advertising in somebody else's language can just catch their eye and draw their attention to it, and then then they can go on from there. Same with different races, languages, as I've said. People with different thinking or personality style. Again, it's how you advertise, really. How do you get a variety of different people? Your adverts need to be slightly different, for the lively people, for the people who like something funny. Just sort of think on it. If you've got a whole care home to fill, you're going to really want to go fairly wide. People who've been in military service, they may have the transferable skills. They often get left out of employment groups. So think, how would you get to them? You might go through, there are some specialist military support groups, veteran support groups. You might want to do something through their website. People with different education levels, you will have, you may have an educational requirement, but don't make it too complex. Think about the job and think, do you really need this requirement for this job, or is it too high or too low? And once you've set it, you don't really sort of make it as if you only want people with more than that. Really, it's unfair. Genders as well, be male, female, non-binary. You might want to sort of think about, is there anything in your advertising that might exclude this, might make somebody feel that they're not welcome. So just be conscious of what you're writing and how you're portraying things. Okay, technology and automation. You need your recruitment process to be as automated as you can. There's loads and loads of different little bits of software now that a lot of human resource teams have acquired for recruitment processes. And using these processes can really streamline it and make it more efficient. So you often have a process where as soon as an application is received, automatically something will go out to them saying, thank you for your application. We'll get back to you in the next few days, or with a date for when the shortlisting process is going on. The sharper you can keep those and the less hazy you can keep things, the more positive people will view your process as. So any IT you can use that can help you with that is always useful, and it works very well. So you can have applicant tracking systems so that you can pull down a spreadsheet whenever you need it about who's in what stage where, who's got their references in, who's had their interview, that sort of thing. And it helps you feed back to senior managers as well when they're asking for progress reports. Okay. Internal hiring policies. You need a policy in your organization. Do you hire internally or not? Is there an internal process or not? Some do, some don't. There are benefits, but there are shortfalls as well. My little graphic has shown you some of the benefits of shortfalls. It can be time saving. You don't, if you're looking for a senior role and it might be just one job, rather than going out to a complex, expensive recruitment process, if you've got quite a lot of staff in a junior role who are looking for development and have been around for a few years and have got the relevant experience, you could just do an internal recruitment. That really improves morale, as well as it being cheaper and time saving. It can really improve morale because people see that they've got a progress level, and that can be quite important. You might need to think about what jobs you could do internal hiring for and what jobs you couldn't. Um, because one of the downsides is about the skills gap, really, and limited candidates. So you might only be choosing between 5 people, but you want something special for a certain job, and you might think, well, they're all very good, but I want someone bringing in new ideas. I want someone bringing in something different. I want someone bringing in experience from another organization, because we really need to come out with some new goals and maybe change direction. So you need to think about why. So, like I said, you can either have an internal policy that you always do it, or you could have a policy that you do it sometimes. So you need to really think about that. And that's something probably that your whole organization would want to be part of. It wouldn't be probably just your team, or your this one care home. If you're a large company, if you're a large care company, they'll probably have to discuss that at senior management level. Do we do internal hiring? Do not. Quite a lot of them do, because it's quite a specialized job, and they quite like the idea. I think from juniors to seniors and then on to team leaders. There's, very often within care homes, internal hiring is very well considered because it's a good developmental process. It keeps valued staff as well in a quite a competitive field. Okay, so those were some of the factors that are involved when you're planning recruitment, things to think about when you're actually planning your recruitment process. Now we're going to have a look at how do legal factors affect recruitment. And as I said, just to remind you, the laws I'll be looking at here are particularly UK laws, because for this assignment you will have to do some evaluation on the links to legislation and recruitment processes, and they want to see UK legislation used for this. Okay, so you may well be in another country. Please don't, for this one, use your knowledge of your own country. Just do what you've learnt here about UK law. Okay, so in the recruitment process, there are legal factors. They do play a critical role. Um, they are about ensuring fairness of the recruitment process, fairness of the way staff are treated, general equality, and compliance with other relevant laws as well. So all organisations in the country have to adhere to them. Some of them will have some get outs on the Working Time Directive, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. You must try to avoid legal issues. And again, if you do meet all your legal requirements well, then you will be considered a high quality organisation, and your reputation will be high as well. So let's think about a few things. One of the most important is the anti-discrimination laws, and they're all related to the Equalities Act of 2010. You can look at this, you can Google this, and you can get a lot more detail on it. The Equalities Act, really, it's a cornerstone of all the anti-discrimination policies. There were a few different laws, and they were all brought together under the Equalities Act in 2010. And it's really to protect some individuals from unfair treatment, and it's discrimination based on protected characteristics. And these characteristics stand as age, be it too young or too old, gender, so no discrimination, be male, female, or binary, disability, religion, any religion, and sexual orientation. Okay. So you can see there's differences. We've identified gender, but we've also identified sexual orientation. That brings out the LGBTQ plus group, particularly the trans group, who are identified under sexual orientation. Okay. So in the context of recruitment, this legislation pretty mandates that all stages of the process must be conducted fairly without bias. And this can be put to the test, this can be challenged, and if someone you're interviewing challenges you under the Equality Act, you can be fined if it's evidenced. So there will be an inquiry into it and you'll be fined. Okay. And this will be all decisions about hiring, promotion, anything to do with staff. And the important thing that all hirings and promotions are based on merit and the relevant qualifications. Okay. So you also need to ensure that job adverts, your interview process, the sort of questions you ask, won't be identified as a discriminatory approach to any of the protected characteristics, and the selection criteria that you use as well. Okay. And nowadays, most organizations have gone a little bit step further than that, or they often have some sort of affirmative action programs to actively promote diversity and inclusion within the organization. So it might be someone's particular role to look at where some parts of the organization, maybe generally unintentionally, may not be promoting diversity and inclusion as well as they could. So that's something that people keep on the back burner and might keep on a lot of project plans, a lot of objectives or goals for the organization. And it might be an ongoing process, constantly looking at it, seeing if any changes you make have caused a problem with the Equalities Act. Okay. The other, which is also considered an anti-discriminatory law, are the fair recruitment practices. And you can have a look at that on the UK government sites. It can give you some more guidance. They're very essential for upholding all the policies and to comply with the recruitment law. And you need to ensure a fair and inclusive hiring process, you need quite a few principles, really. Job adverts should be crafted using inclusive language. So don't use complex language or specific jargon that only people with certain trainings would know. Avoid any language requirements that might discriminate against certain groups. So, do you really need someone to speak 3 different languages? On the other hand, you might be able to make a special case if your care home is in an area where there is a large contingent of maybe one culture or one language spoke. And I certainly have experience of that, opening a care home in a part of East London with a very large Bengali community, very big Bengali community, and we were opening a home where we were already working quite hard to get people to use our services from the Bengali community because it was for people with special needs. And we identified and we got an exclusion from that to be able to say that, that you would get extra sort of points on the process if you could speak the irrelevant languages as well as English. Okay, so quite a few of our staff were were from the Bengali community and spoke the relevant language, and that was really helpful because our service users had quite severe learning disabilities anyway, and at home their family spoke to them in their native language, and although some of them did understand bits of English, you know, their language skills were quite limited anyway, and they were certainly more comfortable with the language that their mums and dads had used towards them. So when our staff are able to use the same language, it made it a lot easier for someone with very complex needs to settle. So we were able to get, you know, we had to make a case for that, and we had to get it agreed really through our human resource department. But they you know they took it to they took legal advice on it to make sure that we meet, and spoke to CQC, which is the quality organisation that reviews all care homes. So we got approval from them to do what we did. So apart from that, though, generally you're looking at fair recruitment practices. Background checks and privacy laws. There is data compliance. Okay, so the data protection is has taken a much higher profile nowadays than maybe 20 years ago. Privacy rights for candidates and staff are just as important. We've always known that we have to be careful with service users' information, but we have to be careful with staff members' information as well. So there's the general data protection regulations, generally known as the GDPR, and there are limits on how you need to handle data, when you can handle it, how it's stored, where it's kept, how transparent it needs to be. But who needs to know? Not everybody, only those in the recruitment process need to see people's personal data. Um, and you need to get people's consent before you collect the data, and you need to be very, very careful with your accuracy. So make sure, especially those people who are, say, registered nurses, they've got their registration dates, their documents. You need to make sure that all that's kept privately, which is their business. People who might have criminal records, depending on what you're allowed to see them. So that, you know, but you're not allowed to go and discuss it with lots of different people. There are lots of laws. I can't go into it all here, but you could spend some time having a look at GDPR. Okay. Background checks. People are legally obligated to conduct background checks and criminal record checks, especially if we're talking about the care and healthcare and adult care. It's very, very important. Criminal record checks are really important because you might be working with very vulnerable individuals. Okay, so if people have left large gaps on their application forms, you need to actually look into it, and you have a right to ask questions about why. So if there's 3 years unaccounted in all their working list, they need to explain to you, and if possible, evidence what they've been up to. What we don't want to know is have they been in prison, and if so, why, for what reason, really. That's just, or have they been on the run from the law or something? Yeah. So you need to at least question people, and you do have a right to do that. Um, for a lot of care roles, we would use, in this country, we'd use something known as the DBS, the Disclosure and Barring Service, and it's basically anyone who's got a criminal record. It's a central computer. It's linked to the police force. It's managed by them, and anyone with a criminal record is loaded on it, and you will be given the information that's relevant. Okay. And it depends on your organization. Now, sometimes a criminal record doesn't immediately say that you can't work in that role. You you have to make you have a discussion about that really. You might find that someone might have a criminal record for dangerous driving. Well, okay, you might not let them be you know, the Holmes minibus driver. But on the other hand, if it's something they sort of did when they were 18 and it's still on their record, but otherwise they've had a sort of fairly exemplary life, would you really, and you feel they were a very suitable candidate to work in your care home, would you really sort of exclude them because of a driving offence? Um, some people might have sort of minor drug offences, and you have to make a decision about whether you think that one's relevant or not, or I don't know, shoplifting or something like that. They might have something that, again, something they did in their teens but remains on their record. However, if you've got someone who is, you know, criminal record is actual or grievous bodily harm or stealing from old people or things like that, then you would think quite clearly that you do not want them to be part of it. And the DBS will tell you all that. It will give you sort of explanation. So it's really important, and it's a legal requirement, particularly in healthcare. Okay, you can't get away from it really. But there are legal requirements about how you handle that information and who you discuss it with. Again, please don't go home on the bus chatting with your friends saying, well, I interviewed this person and that person and that person, and this bloke who lives down the road here, he's got a criminal record for this, this, and this. Can you imagine that? He was only like 21 when he did it. And yes, I know, yes. And it was this in the next street from me as well. So if you give that information, if somebody hears it and it gets circulated elsewhere, you are in trouble. Okay, you will have caused a problem for your organisation. So it's very important. It's not shared with anybody. You do not tell other members of staff in the team what's on someone's DBS. It's a need to know with senior management, really. Okay, and then it's put aside, locked away. It's usually kept electronically, but password protected, so that only certain people can have access to it. Immigration laws. If you hire international candidates, and that's something that we often do in care, every now and then we have an influx of people from other countries because sometimes you can't fill all the posts in care. Immigration laws and work visas are really, really crucial. Um, you have to verify the eligibility of candidates to work in the country. You have to make sure they've complied with applicable immigration regulations. You do need to have records of passports, visa and visa documents. They need to be photocopied. They need to be on the person's file. And if they don't produce them, you cannot let them keep working with you. You have to let them go. Otherwise, if it gets found out that you have someone without documents or with forged documents or any other form of dodgy documents or lacking in documents, you will have a very substantial fine for your organisation, and they will lose their jobs anyway, and they will probably get deported if they don't have the correct documents. But it's very important that you know, because not knowing is not an explanation. If you have someone who comes in and says, oh yes, I've got all the documents, I'll bring them to you, and they don't do it, and then when a spot check is done by the Home Office, which they can do because somebody told somebody that there was somebody without documents, blah blah blah, and they come in and they check it, you will be the person held responsible because you employed them without that document. So the fact they haven't brought it to you, yes, that's their fault too. But for you to let them keep working, it's on you really. Okay, so you have to tell them, you have to threaten them in the end to say that I can't let you back here into work until you produce your documents. So just bear that in mind. Um, Unfortunately, forged documents are a thing. They certainly are in the UK. Um, we got a lot of people. I have an experience of somewhere where I worked, where a whole care home had about 7 or 8 staff members on illegal documents. They were all forged. Now, to be fair, the Home Office did not hold us responsible because we didn't, I mean, they looked very good and we couldn't tell any better, really. But what had happened was it was basically a piece of organized crime. There was an agency that was actually forging people's documents. So what we had to do was agree never to use that agency. Well, the people who ran the agency was arrested anyway, and so were all the staff members. So we ended up with a care home with overnight one weekend we lost about 8 staff members. We had done everything correctly, but you still felt very uncomfortable because you have to go to a hearing to find out whether they're going to hold you responsible or not. And I can assure you, fortunately, it wasn't myself, but it was one of the other service managers who dealt with the care. She had to be responsible, but we had legal and we had human resources who went along with her, and they had done everything they could correctly. But it's still an unpleasant experience, I can assure you, and it's not something you want. Okay, employment contracts. You need to have clear and comprehensive employment contracts. You need to give someone an offer letter. Once you've decided you want to employment, you need a nice formal letter of offer of employment with start dates on it. Usually with start dates, usually with the salary, terms and conditions of employment, um, a little overview of responsibilities, how much they're going to get paid, what extra benefits there are, and what the termination clauses are. That's really important, so you need to give them a little breakdown of how much notice somebody might be given if they do this, this, and this. There might be different levels of termination, like, a written warning, a second warning, and then a final warning. Um, and there might be also a probationary period. This is quite common, that none of your benefits start for, say, 3 months or 6 months in your job. And if you don't do well in the probationary period, you can be let go. It's much easier to let someone go in the probationary period, obviously, than it is after you've been taken on properly. So, types of employment contracts there are many, but really the 3 main ones are permanent contracts, which offers employees sort of ongoing employment, for as long as the job's there. And it will include your terms, your salaries, your benefits, and any notice periods. Temporary contracts, which are often used to sort of do small projects, like a 6-month project, or for a fixed period. You often have them in organisations, say like over Christmas, they're like the post office or certain shops, where they may have temporary contracts for 3 months over Christmas because the footfall goes up, lots more people shopping, or the post office, a lot more people sending cards, things like that. So temporary contracts quite commonly used there, and they will have different notice periods and termination clauses because they are as short, they can be 6 months, said 3 months, 12 weeks. So the notice period won't be a 3-month notice like they could be in a permanent contract. It might be 4 weeks, or it might be 1 week really in a temporary contract. It's a short one. It will really differ, but everybody on that contract will be treated in the same way. That's the most important thing. And then now, what's much more common and not very well loved by a lot of people is such thing as a 0-hour contract. Now, it can provide a lot of flexibility for employers and the staff, but it does mean there are no guaranteed hours of work. So it could be a bit, like an agency, like you cover when people are short. Um, we've had them a lot in care for many years, like bank. So people work extra shifts on what we know as the bank. So sometimes there's work, sometimes there isn't work. If someone's off sick, there might be a lot of work, and people will break up the shifts. But it's being used a lot in jobs where they never used it before, like retail and things like that. And it means that some people don't know from one week to the next whether they're going to work or not. Now, the difference between care work and nursing work using the bank is they've usually got set hours and they're usually working over and above that. So it's a different sort of contract, really. But for those who work for Uber or, doing delivery like Just Eat or Uber Eats, they're very often 0 hour contracts. They only work when someone calls them. So they have no minimum wage at all. However, officially, legally in the UK, they must still comply with the minimum wage and some other legal requirements. But they certainly, one of the things they don't have, anyone on 0 hours contract, it's a bit of a loophole, is they don't have to have any benefits. So you don't have to give them sick pay. They never become entitled to sick pay. They very rarely become entitled to holiday pay. Sometimes they can make up a couple of hours of holiday pay here and there, but it's generally not that much. So there is a very negative side to 0 hour contracts. Some people they sue, some students are happy to do them because they just work, a few hours here and there, and every little helps. But for those who need to work regularly, they're quite tough. So it's important that you need to know the difference between the type of contracts and what you can give and what you can't give. Again, hopefully, if you've got a human resource department, you'd get a lot of support from that with them. Age and youth employment laws. No particular issues about maximum ages in the UK at the moment, but there is an expectation that older workers are not subject to age-based discrimination, that people don't choose younger people over them for various reasons. If they can prove they can do the same job as others, you can't make assumptions just because someone's in their 60s that they're slower or can't work the computer as well, all these sort of stereotypes. You need to make sure you don't do that sort of thing. And the same with young people as well, just to assume that because they're under 21 that they don't know anything and they're irresponsible. You can't really take those sort of attitudes. There are limitations on minimum ages for employment. I think in the UK it's about 13, but there are you're only allowed to work so many hours until you're about 17, and then after that you can pick up hours. It sort of goes, you pick up more hours at 16 and more hours at 17, and then it's after 18 you can work full time. So there are restrictions for certain hazardous jobs. There are age restrictions for that, and they're all laid out so you can look those up, really. In the care field, most places won't take people under about 17, really, because they're not allowed to work long enough hours. But again, you can look that up. So there is a national minimum wage, which we're going to look at in a minute. Oh, the Working Time Directive and the national minimum wage. Two regulations here. National minimum wage is that the government sets out a wage. It's about £12 something at the moment, I think. And you're not allowed to pay people less than that unless they're of a certain age. And if they're under 21, there's a wage, and if they're under 18, there's another minimum wage, and they're lower. I don't really know what the justification for them being lower is. I've certainly never heard it explained, but however, there is minimum wages. There's also limits on working hours as well, and that changes because it gets reviewed every now and then. So there's limits on how many hours people can work. It's usually about I think The working time directive is at the moment set on 40 hours a week, and you have to have rest breaks of at least 10 minutes in every so many hours. And there is a minimum annual leave entitlement that you have to give as well if they're a full-time employee. However, there are quite a lot of jobs that are able to opt out of the working time directive. They have to justify it, but adult care is definitely one of them, because if you're working shifts, you end up working more than 40 hours very often. Maybe one week you might work less the next week, but because of that, they're out of the working time directive. But they've still got to be held to reasonable hours. So again, most people in healthcare are monitored by CQC, so they would be checking the hours and asking you to explain why, why you're not trying to meet what the sort of minimum requirements are. If you think about doctors who work in hospitals, they do not meet the 40-hour thing. They do tend to still average about a 70-hour week, although they do have a bit of time off in between. It's not unusual for them because of what they do and the fact that they're on call quite a lot of the time. This is a bit of the same with sort of police as well. They often have to be brought in, maybe on their days off if something happens in an area. And they don't really have any choice, they just have to do it. So they frequently go above. So they tend to be exempt from the working time directive. So it's, if you cannot run the job without, but there's a limited amount, and you can't just try and exempt yourself from the working time directive. You've got to be very, very clear, really, and there is guidance. So to conclude, recruitment process, it's multifaceted, it's pretty dynamic, it's influenced by various factors. If you think back to the beginning slides, organizations compete for top talent. If you understand these factors, it can make a significant difference. And it's what you're aiming for is the right candidates and the high quality candidates, really. You need to keep evaluating your recruitment strategy to make sure you can meet changing market conditions and to meet the candidate expectations. And if you emphasize factors such as competitive compensation, diversity and inclusion, you leverage technology, that can really, really elevate your recruitment process to attract and engage top tier talent, which will in time affect the company's success and growth. So next, what I want you to do is have a look at the 2 resources I've added for this week. Okay. Take some time, read through it. You might want to make some notes. Take a bit of time to look further into the recruitment legislation. Make sure you're clear on that, because you do have to answer a little bit on it in the assignment. So you can Google some of the pieces of legislation and get a bit of a wider, and maybe find some examples if you want, because that always helps when you're trying to explain yourself. As I said, focus on UK legislation as the course is built around that. Make yourself some notes, really, while you've got the time, so you can be familiar with some of the highlights and think up, as I said, think up some examples that you could use. Okay, because examples are going to help with a higher grade. Okay, thank you. That's it for this week, and I'll see you for next week's